Well, there are. I mean, without any doubt, within all religions there are fundamentalists, and fundamentalism by its nature can be rather close to the outside world and thus outside ideas. But as someone, I mentioned talk radio earlier, who for years has hosted a talk radio show, I meet so-called atheists every day who can barely tie their shoes.
Well, I think that's true. That's why I said at the beginning that it's important to understand why you are an atheist, not that you are an atheist, right? Having those good reasons to, and that's explicitly why I put that in the beginning. Right. There are people who are atheists, right? And atheism only really describes just lack of theism. So that would accurately describe like Joseph Stalin as well as Bertrand Russell, even though they disagree on basically everything.
I'm not sure about that, because Bertrand Russell, of course, who is well known for being a non-believer, later in his life said, I can no longer use the word atheist because I realize that intellectually it's not sustainable. He said, I don't believe there's a God, but as a materialist, unless, and by the way, materialism doesn't, of course, mean just wanting things. Right. As a materialist, unless I can see everything, I can never say there is no God. I can believe there's no God, I doubt there's a God, but I can never say there is no God. I will no longer use the word atheist.
Right, and I think in that passage, and Dawkins takes this up as well, he says that, well, we can't really be sure, but that's where his teapot argument comes in, or the likeness to, like, the flying spaghetti monster and fairies. And actually, the fairies one, I think, is not as silly as it sounds, right? Because there were periods of time
Tell us about that.
Okay. There were periods of time and places where people genuinely believed in fairies. Like in my own family, actually, my great-grandfather, genuinely in England, believed that there were little people that
at the bottom of the garden.
Yeah, exactly. and they were responsible. They were actually very active in their own lives. Like if you lost something in your house, then it was believed that the little people had taken it, and there were just these little nymphs running around.
He didn't become Prime Minister, did he?
Oh no, certainly. No, that would be horrifying. But I think that's. So I don't think that's as offensive as it sounds. That like if we believe that there's no reasons anymore for believing in fairies, I think likely we won't find very many good reasons for believing in God in the future.
I haven't met many people, I have to admit, who believe in fairies, and...
oh, not now, but that's largely my point, is that that we've gotten to the stage where we've realized more about, especially about how the memory system works, right? So it's likely that you simply forgot that you put the spoon in the dish, right? And I think, likely, I think in the future that there'll be a time when a lot of these arguments are actually quite old for theism.
Doesn't seem to. Arthur Conan. I read a biography of Arthur Conan Doyle. Not a very good biography, but a biography of Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes' creator. And of course, he did believe in fairies, and he had photographs from a couple of Yorkshire schoolgirls he were convinced were genuine. But he abandoned Catholicism. He was raised a Catholic to become a spiritualist. I hear atheists talk about Santa Claus is a standard one. There'll be emails tonight from really clever people saying, yo, your friend Santa. People who believe in Santa Claus, I believed in Santa Claus when I was 5, 6, 7. Probably not true. As I grew older, reached the age of maturity, thought, read, understood, I abandoned the idea. I wasn't raised in a Christian home. As I got older, read, matured, understood, I developed a belief in God. There's overwhelming evidence to show that as people grow, often they increase their belief in God. There's There's overwhelming evidence to show that as people grow older, unless they have some sort of mental instability, they refuse to believe in Santa anymore. They're totally contradictory.
Well, actually, I'd say that I think you're drawing a parallel that doesn't really exist, right?
Yeah, because it does.
Well, no, I'd say that belief in God, especially when you cite statistics that say that people become more religious when they get older, I think that that's largely because there's the tendency not to become religious, but because of the nature of the demographics and how poor the research has been in the last 100 years, that older people tend to be religious simply because...
I mean over 14 or 15. Well, okay, let's make it simpler then. How many people over the age of 21 are convinced there's a Santa Claus? How many people over the age of 21 are convinced there's a God? And the people over 21 didn't believe in God in an earlier age, but did believe in Santa. I mean, quite clearly, people abandon a sense in some things as they become mature, and they embrace a belief often when they become mature. So to compare the belief in God with the belief in Santa or fairies, it's one of those digressionary arguments that are put forward. It doesn't really address the real issue.
Oh, no, well... I was actually giving that in response to something earlier that you had said. So what my point was, bringing up fairies, is that we have no evidence for fairies, right? And similarly, there's no evidence or necessary evidence for God.
Good point to go to break, and we'll ask you that when we come back. And the fairy community, I mean, I meant no harm. Anyway, back in a few moments on the Michael Coren Show. Interesting point being made here. Fairies, there's no evidence that they exist, but equally, where's the evidence that God does exist?
I think the disanalogy is the following. We have good evidence that fairies do not exist. The reason people don't believe in Santa Claus is not simply there's a lack of evidence for him. There's good evidence that there is no such person. By contrast, with respect to God, I think we have both good evidence for the existence of God that I enumerated earlier, but I don't think Michael can present any good argument that there is no God. The atheist here has a burden of proof to sustain his claim that there is no such being as God, and I don't think this is a burden that the atheist can carry. I would like to come back to an earlier point, if I may, too, and that is the notion that atheists are somehow the intelligentsia among us and so forth. I think this is just completely false. The spate of new books published by the new atheists like Harris and Hitchens and Dawkins and so forth are not sophisticated books intellectually. These are, for the most part, angry, bitter diatribes against religion. And while someone like Dawkins may be a good scientist in his field, when he begins to talk about philosophy and theology, he is merely a layman. And The God Delusion is a very unsophisticated book intellectually. As a philosopher, I was just appalled at the arguments he gives in that book. It is an embarrassment, really, I think.
Well, I can agree, and I suspect Michael may as well. That
I think he would, too.
If you look at the reviews, this man is respected in his field.
Yes.
But this book, if you look at the reviews, they're quite damning. I used to work with Chris Hitchens. He's a bright guy. He's a fun guy. This is not a profound book. It's a fun book in many ways. So I think most people would agree that the three you mentioned in particular, Dawkins, Harris, and Hitchens, what they've written is not first-class scholarship. However, there are first-class scholars and genuine intellectuals who do not believe at all in God.
Certainly there are, Michael, but there has also been, especially over the last 50 years, since the late 1960s, a literal revolution in my discipline, philosophy, in the Anglo-American world, which has brought about a renaissance of Christian philosophy, such that some of our finest philosophers at our most prestigious universities are now outspoken Bible-believing Christians.
Sir?
I'm sorry, where is this philosophical revolution taking place?
In the Anglo-American realm.
The ones dominated by assumed atheists, like people like Ayer, people like Bertrand Russell, who really dominated. Like, well, I'm sorry, I just never have heard
What was the first
this.
thing you said?
I think you meant Ayer.
Oh,
A.J. Ayer.
But
that's a bygone generation, Michael. I'm talking about today.
Okay, let's talk about people from today, like Quine, right?
He's dead too.
Well, he died only a couple of years, like
so did Freddie, yeah, but I mean...
let's talk about, let's name names, people like Richard Swinburne at Oxford University, Robert and Marilyn Adams at Oxford, Brian Leftow at Oxford, people like Alvin Planning at University of Notre Dame, Peter Van Inwagen, Dallas Willard, Eleanor Stump. I mean, I could go on and on naming names at top universities in America and England who are outspoken Christians, such that the face of my discipline, compared to the 1930s and 40s, when Russell and Ayer were dominant, has been utterly transformed.